How can someone commit a murder in less than 60 seconds and still believe they will never be caught? How can an entire investigation depend on a single minute that changed everything forever? On the morning of October 21st, 2023, community leader Samantha Woll was found fatally injured outside her Detroit home. At first, investigators had almost nothing to work with. There were no obvious witnesses, no immediate answers, and no clear motive. But hidden among surveillance footage, forensic evidence, and a carefully reconstructed timeline was one crucial minute that would transform the entire investigation. As detectives followed every second of that timeline, they uncovered a case filled with unexpected twists, unanswered questions, and a suspect who believed 60 seconds would be enough to get away with murder. In the early hours of October 21st, 2023, what appeared to be a quiet Saturday morning in Detroit suddenly became the scene of one of the city's most high-profile homicide investigations. Neighbors woke to flashing emergency lights, police officers securing a residential street, and a growing sense that something terrible had happened. Few could have imagined that the victim was Samantha Woll, a respected community leader whose death would leave investigators searching for answers that were anything but straightforward. Just hours earlier, Samantha had spent the evening attending a wedding, surrounded by friends and family. Nothing about the night suggested that it would end in tragedy. After returning home, she was expected to continue with her normal weekend plans. Instead, shortly before dawn, she was found outside her own residence with fatal injuries. The discovery immediately transformed a peaceful neighborhood into an active crime scene. Investigators quickly began documenting every detail. Crime scene technicians photographed evidence, collected forensic samples, and searched for anything that could explain what had happened during those critical moments outside Samantha's home. Detectives knew that the first hours of a homicide investigation are often the most important, and every decision made that morning could determine whether the person responsible would ever be identified. At first, very little made sense. There were no immediate eyewitnesses who could describe exactly what had happened. The neighborhood was quiet, and those who lived nearby had seen nothing unusual before emergency responders arrived. Detectives were left with a difficult challenge: reconstructing a crime that had unfolded in near silence. As news of Samantha's death spread, the community reacted with shock. She was widely known for her civic involvement and leadership, making the case especially significant. Friends struggled to understand how someone so active and respected could become the victim of such a violent crime. The pressure on investigators increased almost immediately, with the public demanding answers. Detectives expanded their search beyond the immediate crime scene. Officers began reviewing surveillance cameras from nearby homes and businesses, hoping that even a few seconds of footage might provide a lead. They also started interviewing everyone who had seen Samantha during the previous evening, carefully rebuilding her final known movements one step at a time. As forensic specialists processed the evidence, investigators realized that this would not be a case solved by a single witness or an obvious suspect. Instead, it would depend on technology, patience, and the careful reconstruction of a timeline measured almost second by second. Somewhere within those missing moments, the truth was waiting. One particular detail soon captured investigators' attention. Based on the evidence collected and the developing timeline, they believed the attack had unfolded incredibly quickly. The person responsible appeared to have had only a brief opportunity to act before disappearing into the darkness. That narrow window would soon become one of the most important elements of the entire investigation. At that point, detectives still had more questions than answers. Who had been waiting for Samantha? Was she specifically targeted, or had something unexpected happened after she arrived home? Every possibility remained open, and investigators refused to rush toward conclusions before the evidence pointed them in the right direction. What they did not yet know was that the next phase of the investigation would revolve around less than a single minute, a tiny slice of time that would ultimately shape one of the most closely watched homicide investigations in recent Detroit history. As detectives reviewed the evidence collected at the crime scene, one detail immediately stood out. Based on Samantha Woll's final movements and the available surveillance footage, investigators believed the attack had lasted less than a minute. It was an astonishing realization. Whoever was responsible had acted quickly, left the scene almost immediately, and disappeared before anyone nearby realized what had happened. The possibility that such a devastating crime could occur in such a short period of time presented investigators with a significant challenge. If the timeline was correct, there would be very little room for mistakes, unexpected encounters, or additional witnesses. Every second mattered. Detectives understood that reconstructing those final moments would likely determine whether the case could ever be solved. Surveillance cameras soon became one of the investigation's most valuable tools.
Officers gathered footage from homes, nearby businesses, and traffic cameras throughout the neighborhood. Instead of looking only for the suspect, investigators searched for every vehicle, pedestrian, and unusual movement occurring before and after Samantha arrived home. Even someone who appeared unrelated to the crime could help establish the timeline. At the same time, forensic specialists continued processing physical evidence collected from the scene. Every sample was carefully documented and sent for laboratory analysis. Detectives knew that crimes committed in a matter of seconds often leave behind only subtle traces, making scientific evidence just as important as eyewitness testimony. Investigators also focused on Samantha's activities during the previous evening. They interviewed friends, family members, and everyone who had interacted with her before she returned home. Their goal was to determine whether anyone had followed her, contacted her unexpectedly, or displayed behavior that seemed unusual in hindsight. As more information became available, detectives began comparing every interview with electronic records and surveillance footage. Small differences started appearing. Some details matched perfectly, while others raised new questions. Rather than drawing immediate conclusions, investigators carefully verified every inconsistency before deciding whether it had any connection to the crime.
The public closely followed every development, but law enforcement intentionally revealed very little. Detectives understood that protecting key details was essential. Certain facts remained known only to investigators, allowing them to evaluate future witness statements and identify information that only the person responsible would likely know. Behind the scenes, analysts reconstructed Samantha's final movements almost second by second. The timeline became increasingly precise. Investigators now believed they understood exactly when Samantha arrived home, when the attack likely occurred, and how quickly the suspect had left the area. What remained unknown was the identity of the person who had used that brief window of time to commit the crime. Then another important discovery shifted the investigation. Evidence suggested that the answer would not come from a dramatic eyewitness or an immediate confession. Instead, it would emerge through the careful combination of forensic science, surveillance footage, and digital evidence. Piece by piece, detectives were beginning to uncover a story that was far more complicated than anyone had expected. What had started as an investigation into a murder committed in less than a minute was about to become one of the most closely examined homicide cases in recent Detroit history. And the deeper detectives looked, the more unexpected the evidence became. With no clear suspect and no eyewitness who had seen the attack unfold, detectives turned their attention to the only witness that could not forget details: time itself. Every surveillance camera, phone record, and forensic report was placed alongside a growing timeline that investigators hoped would reveal what happened during Samantha Woll's final moments. If the killer had less than a minute to act, every second before and after the attack suddenly became just as important as the crime itself. Teams of investigators spent countless hours reviewing surveillance footage frame by frame. Vehicles entering the neighborhood were identified and tracked. Pedestrians walking nearby were documented. Detectives were not searching only for suspicious behavior. They were searching for anything that did not belong. Often, the smallest detail can become the breakthrough that transforms an investigation. At the same time, forensic analysts continued examining physical evidence recovered from the scene. DNA samples, fingerprints, and trace evidence were processed using advanced laboratory techniques. Unlike witness testimony, physical evidence cannot be influenced by memory or emotion. Investigators understood that science would likely play a decisive role in identifying whoever was responsible. Detectives also expanded their investigation into Samantha's personal and professional life. They interviewed colleagues, friends, relatives, and acquaintances, looking for conflicts, recent concerns, or anyone who may have had contact with her in the days leading up to her death. Every lead was investigated thoroughly, regardless of how unlikely it initially appeared. As the investigation progressed, the volume of information became enormous. Thousands of digital records, surveillance clips, and interview transcripts had to be compared against one another. Analysts worked to eliminate coincidences and focus only on evidence that could be independently verified. The goal was not simply to identify a suspect, but to build a timeline supported entirely by facts. Public attention continued growing with every passing day. News coverage increased, speculation spread across social media, and countless theories emerged online. Despite the pressure, investigators refused to comment on many aspects of the case. They knew that releasing too much information could compromise the investigation or allow a future suspect to adjust their story. Weeks passed, and detectives remained committed to following the evidence rather than public opinion. Every new discovery was carefully tested against the existing timeline. Some leads quickly disappeared. Others became stronger as additional evidence confirmed them. Little by little, the picture became clearer. Then, investigators identified information that shifted the direction of the case.
A combination of forensic findings and newly analyzed evidence suggested that the investigation had been overlooking a crucial connection. It was not yet enough to identify the killer with certainty, but it was enough to move detectives toward a far more focused line of inquiry. What had started as an investigation with almost no witnesses was becoming one built on science, technology, and patience. Every hour spent analyzing evidence brought detectives one step closer to understanding exactly what had happened outside Samantha Woll's home. The biggest breakthrough, however, was still ahead. Soon, investigators would uncover evidence that would completely change the direction of the case and raise even more questions about who was truly responsible. Just as investigators believed they were beginning to understand what had happened, the case took an unexpected turn. A person of interest emerged, and detectives believed they were getting closer to identifying the individual responsible for Samantha Woll's death. Public confidence grew as many assumed an arrest was imminent, but experienced investigators knew that suspicion alone was never enough. As detectives continued gathering evidence, they carefully compared forensic findings with surveillance footage, digital records, and witness interviews. Every fact had to support the next. In a homicide investigation receiving intense public attention, there could be no shortcuts.
Any mistake could jeopardize the entire prosecution. Eventually, investigators announced an arrest. The development immediately made national headlines, and many believed the mystery had finally been solved. Prosecutors moved forward, convinced that the evidence justified bringing the case to court. For Samantha's family and the community, it appeared that justice was finally within reach. However, as legal proceedings progressed, serious questions began to emerge. Defense attorneys challenged portions of the evidence, while additional forensic analysis raised concerns about whether investigators had reached the correct conclusion. The case, which had seemed nearly resolved, suddenly became far more complicated. Rather than ignoring those concerns, investigators and prosecutors continued reviewing every piece of evidence. Criminal investigations do not end with an arrest. If new information challenges previous conclusions, law enforcement has a responsibility to re-examine the facts. That process can be difficult, especially in cases that have already attracted widespread public attention. As additional forensic testing and independent reviews were completed, confidence in the original theory began to weaken. Detectives found themselves asking difficult questions.
Had they misunderstood part of the timeline? Had certain pieces of evidence been interpreted too quickly? Most importantly, if the original suspect was not responsible, then who was? The investigation entered an entirely new phase. Detectives returned to evidence that had already been examined, this time looking at it from a different perspective. Surveillance footage was reviewed again. Digital records were analyzed once more. Witness statements were revisited with fresh eyes. Sometimes, solving a case requires investigators to challenge their own assumptions. Eventually, prosecutors made the difficult decision to dismiss the charges against the original suspect after determining that the available evidence was no longer sufficient to proceed. It was an extraordinary development in a case that had already shocked the public. Once again, Samantha Woll's murder became an unsolved homicide. The announcement left the community with even more questions than before. If the person initially arrested was no longer believed to be responsible, then the individual who committed the crime could still be unidentified. The investigation was far from over. Detectives now faced their greatest challenge yet, not simply finding a suspect, but rebuilding a case from the ground up, while ensuring that every future conclusion would be supported by evidence capable of withstanding the highest level of scrutiny.
When the charges against the original suspect were dismissed, the investigation entered unfamiliar territory. Cases like this are especially difficult for detectives because they require investigators to revisit months of work while resisting the temptation to force a conclusion. Samantha Woll's family still deserved answers, but those answers had to be supported by evidence strong enough to stand in court. Detectives returned to the beginning. Every surveillance recording was reviewed once again. Every witness interview was re-examined. Every forensic report was analyzed with fresh eyes. Rather than assuming the investigation had failed, law enforcement treated the case as though they were solving it for the first time. Forensic specialists continued processing evidence using updated laboratory techniques whenever possible. Advances in forensic science have solved countless cold cases years after they first occurred, and investigators remained hopeful that additional testing might reveal something previously overlooked. Sometimes, a single overlooked detail can completely change the direction of an investigation. Investigators also continued receiving tips from the public. Some were quickly ruled out, while others required extensive follow-up. Detectives understand that high-profile cases often generate hundreds of leads, many of which ultimately have no connection to the crime. Every tip, however, had to be evaluated before it could be dismissed.
Meanwhile, Samantha's family continued waiting for answers. Their focus had never been on speculation or public theories. They wanted only one thing: the truth. As months passed, they repeatedly expressed hope that investigators would eventually identify the person responsible and bring the case to a conclusion supported by evidence rather than assumptions. Law enforcement publicly confirmed that the investigation remained active. Detectives refused to describe the case as closed, emphasizing that new evidence could still emerge. This approach is common in complex homicide investigations, where physical evidence remains available for future analysis, and where technological advances may produce new leads. Public interest in the case remained intense. Online discussions produced countless theories, but investigators consistently reminded the public that speculation is not evidence. Throughout the investigation, detectives focused only on facts that could be independently verified through forensic science, surveillance footage, witness testimony, or documented records. One of the most frustrating aspects of the case was that investigators knew the attack itself had unfolded incredibly quickly. Yet solving a crime rarely depends on how long it takes to commit it. Instead, it depends on whether enough reliable evidence exists to identify the person responsible beyond a reasonable doubt. That legal standard protects both victims and the integrity of the justice system. Today, Samantha Woll's murder remains one of Detroit's most closely watched unsolved homicide investigations. Detectives continue asking the public for information, believing that someone, somewhere, may still possess the missing piece that finally explains what happened during those crucial moments outside her home. Although investigators have reconstructed much of the timeline, the most important question remains unanswered: who killed Samantha Woll? That mystery continues to drive the investigation forward, even as time passes. As the months passed, investigators remained convinced that the answer was hidden somewhere within the evidence already collected. The attack itself may have lasted less than a minute, but reconstructing those final moments required thousands of hours of investigative work. Every frame of surveillance footage, every forensic report, and every witness interview continued to be examined in hopes of uncovering the one detail that had been missed. Unlike many homicide investigations, Samantha Woll's case contained no clear confession, no eyewitness who observed the attack, and no overwhelming piece of physical evidence that immediately identified the person responsible. Instead, detectives were forced to rely on a careful combination of science, technology, and traditional investigative methods. The investigation also highlighted one of the greatest challenges faced by modern law enforcement. Solving a crime is not enough if the evidence cannot prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Investigators may develop theories, identify possible suspects, or discover suspicious behavior, but none of those factors alone are sufficient in a courtroom. Every conclusion must ultimately be supported by reliable evidence. As forensic technology continues advancing, many investigators remain hopeful that evidence collected from the crime scene may someday reveal information that was impossible to detect at the time of the original investigation. Across the United States, numerous homicide cases have been solved years later because new scientific techniques uncovered answers hidden within evidence that had been preserved. Detectives have repeatedly emphasized the importance of public cooperation. Someone may remember a seemingly insignificant detail, notice something they previously overlooked, or come forward with information they once believed was unimportant. In many investigations, a single new witness or overlooked observation has completely changed the direction of a case. Meanwhile, Samantha's family continues living with unanswered questions. While the legal process demands certainty before charges can be filed, families often spend years waiting for the day when investigators finally identify the person responsible. That uncertainty becomes one of the heaviest burdens carried by victims' loved ones.
The investigation also serves as a reminder that appearances can be deceptive. Early assumptions in any criminal case can quickly change as new evidence emerges. For that reason, experienced investigators remain committed to following the evidence wherever it leads, even if it requires revisiting previous conclusions or acknowledging that earlier theories were incomplete. Today, Samantha Woll's murder remains an active reminder that justice sometimes moves slowly. Although the attack itself lasted less than 60 seconds, the search for the truth has continued for years. Detectives remained committed to finding answers, believing that every unsolved case still holds the possibility of being solved. The question that opened this story still remains: how can someone commit a murder in less than a minute and seemingly disappear without a trace? Investigators believe the answer still exists. It simply has not been discovered yet. That belief continues to drive the investigation, ensuring that Samantha Woll's story has not been forgotten and that the search for justice remains very much alive. Years have passed since Samantha Woll lost her life, yet the investigation remains one of Detroit's most closely followed unsolved homicide cases. Although detectives reconstructed much of her final evening, the most important question remains unanswered. Who was waiting outside her home, and why? Investigators have never stopped working the case. Evidence collected during the original investigation continues to be preserved, allowing forensic experts to re-examine it whenever new technology becomes available. Across the country, advances in DNA analysis and forensic science have solved cases that remained mysteries for decades. Detectives remain hopeful that Samantha's case could one day follow the same path. Every homicide investigation leaves behind more than physical evidence. It leaves families searching for answers, investigators determined to find the truth, and communities trying to understand how such a tragedy could occur. Samantha's death deeply affected not only those who knew her personally, but also countless people who had admired her dedication to public service and community leadership. For law enforcement, this investigation also became a reminder that justice cannot be rushed. While public pressure often demands immediate arrests, experienced detectives understand that a successful prosecution requires evidence capable of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Solving a case means identifying the right person, not simply identifying someone. The decision to dismiss the original charges demonstrated how important that principle is. Rather than moving forward with a case unsupported by sufficient evidence, prosecutors chose to step back and continue searching for the truth. Although frustrating for everyone involved, that decision reflected the legal system's commitment to ensuring that convictions are based on reliable evidence rather than assumptions. Today, investigators continue encouraging anyone with information to come forward. A conversation someone once dismissed as unimportant, a forgotten observation, or a detail that seemed insignificant at the time could still become the missing piece of the investigation. History has shown that many homicide cases are solved years later because one person finally decides to speak. The story of Samantha Woll is ultimately about more than an unsolved crime. It is about persistence. It is about investigators refusing to abandon a case simply because the answers are difficult to find. Every file remains open. Every piece of evidence remains preserved. Every lead continues to be evaluated. 1 minute changed Samantha Woll's life forever, but the search for the person responsible has lasted far longer than 60 seconds. It has become a years-long effort driven by science, determination, and the hope that one day the truth will finally emerge. Until that day comes, Samantha Woll's murder remains a powerful reminder that some investigations do not end with an arrest or a conviction. Sometimes the greatest challenge is continuing to search for answers when the truth remains just out of reach. And perhaps somewhere, hidden within evidence already collected or in information someone has yet to share, lies the final piece that will one day bring justice to Samantha Woll and the people who continue to wait for answers.
Less than 1 minute. That is all investigators believe it took for Samantha Woll's life to be tragically taken. Yet despite years of investigation, countless hours of forensic analysis, surveillance reviews, and witness interviews, the person responsible has not been convicted. The case serves as a powerful reminder that while crimes can happen in seconds, uncovering the truth can take years. Investigators continue to preserve the evidence, follow new leads, and hope that advances in forensic science or new information from the public will one day provide the breakthrough they have been searching for. Until then, Samantha Woll's murder remains an open investigation, and her family continues to wait for the answers they deserve. If you found this documentary informative, please consider subscribing to Final Evidence, leave a like, and share your thoughts respectfully in the comments. Every case we cover is based on documented evidence, with the goal of honoring the victims while exploring how investigators work